Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is episode 6 in the series Parent Leadership for 21st Century Children. Some people still think that leadership is not important, and all parents need to do is just manage a few details of family life. If you believe this, you are willing to rely only on biological aging to create change. And if that is the only tool you rely on, you are missing many opportunities to prepare your children for success. In this episode, learn the 6 steps of promoting change in yourself, your children as individuals, and your family. Using these tools will give you confidence that you can achieve more of what you hope for. Visit mattersmostmedia.org to find more about the podcast and firstanswers.com to find tons of parenting resources.
Hello, this is episode 6 in the series on parental leadership for 21st century children. I've mentioned this at the start of every other episode, and so I'm going to do the same thing, that in my opinion, the types of environment and situations that children face today should suggest to us that we take a look at the kind of leadership that we apply in our families. So, for example, a lot of times as families, we could just get busy about the process of living and take care of disciplining our children and clothing and feeding them and dealing with all the crises and the circumstances and the fun vacations of the day without ever really taking a look at the fact that parents supply a form of leadership that is often very traditional. Sometimes it's traditionally good and sometimes it's traditionally bad. So if your family happens to be blessed with a tradition of excellent parents who love, care for, guide, manage, set boundaries, and so forth for the children, then you are indeed blessed. But if that doesn't happen, then in one generation, parents can lose the opportunity to learn about leadership for the next generation. There might not be any problem with this, but I'm proposing that the parental leadership that I'm describing, instead of worrying about how much control and how much warmth or how much other kinds of things parents supply, that we take a look at that. But in addition, we take a look at the parents' ability to adapt to individual children, to adapt to changes in the environment around them, to adapt to the changes that are needed inside the family environment. So that these adaptation skills need to be part of parental leadership. And one of these skills has to do with promoting change. And that's a very interesting idea because you probably heard about interventions and you probably heard about people going to counseling and trying to modify their families and etc. But as it turns out, families tend to be organized unless there's a great deal of conflict, let's say, or fragmentation, people leaving and etc. That kind of family is not very stable. But most of the other families are. And the reason they're stable is because they form behavioral patterns, interactional patterns that become very stable over time. And so these patterns repeat themselves in this situation and that situation and so on. Even if the behavior is inadequate and even if it produces conflict and difficulty. Quite often the reasons for conflict or mental or emotional problems in family are because people persist in doing something even though they think that it's a good thing, but it has negative or harmful effects that they may not know about. Now, family counselors are supposed to know about this interactional and these interactional patterns, and therefore they should know something about how to intervene and modify them so that they become more healthy, and therefore the family membership have better relationships and healthier lives. Quite often, however, these interventions don't work because of sometimes people are so defensive and upset they're not willing to listen or learn. Sometimes they withdraw from counseling. Sometimes they've heard messages that make them feel like they're inadequate and they don't want to hear any more messages like that. So in this episode, instead of talking about the change that is focused solely on resolving problems or difficult problems, I am talking about change that has to do with moving a child from one developmental level to the next. so that we get used to the idea that as children age, that we adapt ourselves and to our language and our emotions and our boundaries and our rules and begin to make adjustments in relation to their growth. Not only that, however, we want to promote their growth, and sometimes we have to create conditions in the family and in our parental leadership that actually make change in their lives more likely. So I have taken the time over the years to investigate a lot of different kinds of leadership. I had an assignment from my church that invited me to develop leadership programs for adult leaders, and I had a chance to consult with professionals, and from that, I developed a great interest in the concepts of leadership and have had a chance to read about it. I can tell you that a lot of the literature or theories or ideas about leadership may apply to families, but there's a lot that does not. And the reason for that is because families and family life is quite different than any other organization. And it's different because we have people of differing ages, we have important relationships, and if this relationship is not working well, then the others might not be able to, and the others are affected by it. And so we learn things like witnesses of abuse, for example, are as negatively affected as are the victims. We also learned that when there's parental tension and conflict, one or more children will feel that and may actually act out that tension in their lives in a way that is not positive for them. So now in this leadership plan, I have proposed to you that you become knowledgeable about 5 kinds of development. And these developments include physical and mental and emotional and social. And the idea that children learn different tasks, developmental tasks, for each age of their life. Teenagers are working on some. Children under 11 are working on others, and younger children even have their own. And kids, when they become young adults and past 18, they're working on some developmental tasks as well. But sometimes the patterns of interaction in families and sometimes the children's behavior becomes so rooted in these inhibitory patterns that they can't get out of them, and the family cannot get out of them to allow for change to occur. Most family problems, as a general statement, it might be too broad a stroke, but I believe that most family problems could be solved by simply helping children move to the next developmental stage in their lives. And in order for that to happen, the parents need to do the same. So from my consultation with professional leaders and my background in family science, I've tried to put together a leadership program that promotes this kind of change. How do we promote the growth and development of children and families, by the way, so that they are learning, participating, and living at the next level or stage, which is more mature, more elaborate, more complex than the previous stage? Now, please keep in mind that in order for this to work, the parents typically need to be unified about 2 things. Number 1 is, what do we want to see in the lives of our children in 6 months? A simple example of that is the 6th grade child who's going into junior high is going to need to make more individuals by himself or herself. So during the 6th grade, you could help your children move to that stage by doing a good job of teaching them decision making. Or children who are 14 or 15 are more involved in social contacts of a variety of kinds, and they may need to have more information about social skills and tools, and plus how to perceive people accurately, to understand their own feelings and so on. So the whole goal is based on the idea that the parents have gotten together, they're unified about the outcomes they want for the children, and then next, they have to come up with a plan. And what I'm going to describe to you will enable you, if you carry these out, to accomplish just that. So here's number 1. In order to promote change in a family, it's almost always necessary to reduce anxiety before change will occur, because if either the parents or the kids are very anxious, then that results in defensiveness and resistance. So number 1 is foster trust and build cooperation and teamwork. And we propose that you give serious consideration to the necessity of building trust with the members of your family. Now, you might think, well, we have it, everything is fine. But it may not be fine with an individual child who has not communicated frequently, or a child who's had a traumatic event, or somebody who wanted to spend time with a dad or a mother and didn't get to. So number one is foster trust. And here's some suggested ways to do that. Be honest. Be really honest with your children. Keep your promises. Increase your shared time with family members or the family member that you would like to help grow and develop. And if you have more than one child and you're working on the same thing, then we need to schedule time to be together. Next, communicate often about yourself and ask family members to do the same about themselves. We're not talking about a gush of feelings. We're just saying, how do you see this? What do you think about yourself? And so on. Organize at least one family meal a week to identify the positive things which are happening to family members or positive things which they achieve, so that you can give emphasis to the positive, and that produces more trust. Seriously work to improve your listening. Stop interrupting, ask questions, and help you learn to listen to the details of what your children say. Eliminate criticizing and blaming. Display optimism and hopefulness, and I just want to put an editorial comment about that. It's surprising to me that in our day and age that I have to, as part of the work I do dealing with families, emphasize to them the necessity of changing self-criticism and pessimism into something that's more optimistic and hopeful. And when people become so pessimistic and negative, they say, well, nothing's going to change, and they're probably right. And then lastly, minimize expressions of anger and sarcasm and disgust and frustration. I'm going to repeat that. Minimize expressions of anger and sarcasm, disgust, and frustration. Now, principle number 2. This is what I mentioned earlier. Define the direction. You must select the outcomes you want for each child and or for your family. You can do the same thing for your families I'm describing for your child. For example, select a growth objective you have for your family. You'd like them to become more happy or more optimistic or work harder or be whatever you decide. Make sure that the two of you agree. So in order to accomplish that, identify when and where these outcomes are to be talked about and demonstrated. Identify the potential benefits of growing and improving, and then select times to focus on them, to teach about them, to focus on them, reward and approve, and so on, so that it's clear that your outcome is clear to you and clear to your children. So your question to me was, well, should we tell our children what our goals are? I think most of the time the answer is yes. You can say to a son, we think you're going to face this in a few months, so we're trying to get you to learn this now. I think they would interpret it most of the time as a form of affection and guidance from you. Number 3 is to organize a mentoring and family plan. The mentoring is your personal leadership to your child. What are you going to do to help a son learn to decide better decisions, make better decisions? What about helping a child to overcome shyness or increase confidence or anything you decide? This mentoring plan is what you will do as a parent. And the family plan is what you will introduce into the family in order to achieve this desired outcome. I'll give you for example. Well, suppose I have a child and I hope he will become more confident because he tends to be shy. He might withdraw from social situations. And quite often when faced with a new task, he shies away from that and hesitates. So I might talk with my wife and say, I think this would be a good idea. We could talk about what confidence looks like. We can even talk to him and see if it's okay. And then maybe I would be the one to help mentor and help him talk about becoming confident and actually doing a few things so we have his relationship with me. Then let's suppose we put into the family things that would help out. For example, teach about the desired outcome in a family meeting. And then ask children to practice during the week. For instance, suppose a person is shy and hesitates voicing an opinion in a class. So you practice that in your family. Let's suppose in your family you also display love and kindness and gratitude in your family by each individual. I will just tell you again, positive emotions motivate better than threats or pressure. Tell stories describing the benefits of this change that people move to. Find more than one way that the new learning could be practiced. Compliment and praise, and so on. This is a mentoring and a family plan. Now, before mentioning the fourth principle of change in families, I want to say that I recognize that there are some issues that are so tender and so important that you would not mention them to anybody else other than family members, and not even to all of the family members. There are just some things that you keep private between you and the child, but you can still organize plans inside your family even though everybody doesn't know about it. So the fourth principle of this plan for change in families is to identify your allies who can help you achieve or accomplish the desired outcome. So, for example, you could identify family members who would be willing to help your family or the individual in accomplishing the growth goal. Here's an example. When our children were young, my wife and I wanted them to learn some things about the world, and so we invited someone to come and teach us Spanish. And this Spanish teacher came once a week and gave us lessons. And I've mentioned in previous podcasts that we had Spanish words on our furniture and whatever. We also had somebody who came put on a music concert, and someone came and put on an art presentation. It was just amazing to me. And then there are families, other families who may be interested in joining you. So I know you're well aware of the idea that you could talk to a school principal, a teacher, or somebody who might be able to help promote the goals. And if you choose somebody like that, please emphasize that our focus is on the good, positive outcome that we want, not criticizing the behavior that we don't want. I'm going to repeat that. If you invite anybody to help, make sure that you tell them, here are the outcomes we want, like more confidence, and so that they don't spend time on why are you shy, why do you have this, because they can interfere with your whole goal if you do that. Then you also eliminate teasing and ridiculing, and you teach about what it means to genuinely help somebody or harm somebody, so that you make sure that family members help one another and learn how to avoid what hurts one another. Be sure and tell a lot of personal experiences where someone was helped and or someone was harmed by what people did. You have to identify both possibilities, because when you're involved with change, children are trying out something new. They may not get it right the first time. They may not get it right the fifth time. But if you're patient and you persevere, then your children can gradually improve in what are called successive approximations, and they can get a little bit better here and a little bit better there. I've done that trying to teach my kids how to give extemporaneous public speeches. And it's hard and difficult for some of them, and others find it easy. But you just keep going. Now here's number 5. After you've identified your allies who can help you, then you need to take a look and make changes in yourself and your family. Well, why do that? Well, remember the idea that families' interaction patterns tend to be really stable, and even the negative, hurtful ones tend to be stable and repetitive, unless the family is just an unstable family altogether. And so in order for you to help a child change and so on, you might have to make changes as well. So, for example, if you're helping your boy learn to make better decisions, you might have to take a look and decide which decisions you're willing to invite him to change or work with you to change and take them off your plate. So here's how you do that. You identify changes you'll need to make in yourself. Okay, for example, in the previous episode, I talked to you about the 10 parent-child communication tools that are parent impact principles or practices. You probably are going to need to modify one or more of those. Then you would also identify conditions you'll need to change in your family to educate yourselves. Well, you could go to a counselor and learn some things. You could go to the school teacher. You could go to a lot of places, church education programs, so that you can learn how to change things inside your family. It's just dumbfoundingly amazing to me that sometimes when people actually get involved with this, how much they can accomplish. I can remember a father saying, well, I have not been the kind of father I wanted to be. Went into his office and said, I only want 80% of the money, and because that's the amount of time I'm going to work. And he went home and he started to make adjustments for himself and where he spent time and how he talked. And in a relatively short period of time, he and his wife made changes, remarkable changes in their family. By this time in the process, you might have discovered that you might also need to take a look at other people, children's friends, school personnel, sports coaches, extended family, grandparents, uncles, and aunts. Now, you'd have to gauge these people correctly, make sure they understand that we have a desirable outcome that we're seeking for, or don't involve them. We just try to say to people and to parents, stay away from toxic people. So don't involve them in your family in any way. But I will tell you that a coach or a church leader or someone can be very useful if they have the right information and knowing that you're attempting to promote growth in your child. And then last, this is a very interesting part of the principles that I learned in leadership, and it has to do with the difference between, quote, results and progress. I'm proposing that what you learn to do is to measure and emphasize progress. Sometimes parents get so focused on a specific outcome, they want this to happen, they tend to neglect giving emphasis on progress or improvements. So the children are not sure exactly what to do or where to go. And I remember a research project where the second grade teacher had her students divided into twos, and she's going to give a card sorting task to see which group is better in some respect. But one group she took out in recess and said, okay, when you get it right, I'm going to say right. That is, she told the children how to recognize what was good or progress. The other group, she didn't tell that. So both groups go in one at a time or whatever as a group, and they go through this process. Well, hardly to anybody's surprise, the group that learned what right was and to recognize that were way past the other one, because they didn't understand what it meant when the teacher says right or good or so on. But the first group did. So here's what you do. Find and identify any steps that look like improvement and point them out. Identify potential consequences if and when the child make an effort to change. Set aside specific times in your family or with the child to talk about efforts to grow. And talk about things you can see that may happen because of changes in growth. Now, some changes in growth will occur just naturally by virtue of living. But in the day and age in which we live, I just don't think we can rely on that because there are so many influences that impact our kids. There are so many situations that are potentially predatory that didn't exist a decade and a half ago, that we need to, as parent leaders, learn how to promote developmental change and growth and get busy doing it in our families. I hope you do that, and I hope you find a great deal of success.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit firstanswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.